Hey, friends, and welcome back to week 5. Yes, 5 already of RotoWorld's DFS Building Block Show. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined by friend in life, Hayden Winks, and also friend in life, a newcomer to the show, someone I'm very happy to have, the only Matt Gajeski. Matt, how's it going, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to chop up the slate.
So for those that have not come across and have just outright missed out on your content so far, explain to the people what you got going on.
I do a lot of work with college football, also in the NFL DFS streets. I'm over at awesemo.com right now, and you can find all my work there. Kind of writing all over the place, though.
That's what I typically stumble across every Saturday morning when I'm awake is your college football content. I genuinely think, I'm not just saying this because we're on air, that you're one of the best to do it every single week. I personally would prefer you put your stuff behind a paywall. It's so good. But alas, the college sheet is free right now. So until I can convince you to do that, then it's accessible to everyone. And I think it's tremendous. Also, your showdown streams are tremendous as well. And they're unique in that you decide to wake up earlier than the rest of the world. Like you live in the West Coast, but you don't, and run them early in the morning. So it's just like something for people to wake up and have coffee to. Hayden, and what about you? How is your week going?
It's going good. I think that what's unique about us is we all of us dabble in college football DFS here and there. And I think that's actually really important for understanding these rookies. I mean, college fantasy football stats translate to NFL production more than you'd actually think. So I think that there is a little edge of playing a little DFS, a little college fantasy football as well.
Is that how you treat it, Matt, looking at college football, just because you like the sport as well, but then trying to transition that analysis into NFL coverage?
Yeah, and it's not always, these guys walk into immediate roles. But last night, for example, we had Tyler Johnson step up into an immediate role. And I think it just helps knowing who Tyler Johnson is, knowing that he's a primary slot receiver coming out of Minnesota with 2 1,000-yard seasons. And this guy can play a little bit of ball. So knowing that stuff is important, I do think. I agree with Hayden.
I think, hold on, Daigle, real quick. There's a guy that's sitting at $3,000 who was a college fantasy football star. I think we're going to probably be talking about him in a little bit.
Oh, he's my favorite, dude. I love this guy.
See, we're already excited to break down the slate. And quickly, though, because we already have questions in the chat, it would have found legalized. But one, continue to get the questions in because we can do fancy tricks like this on the fly. And two, Matt, tell them where to go, particularly for your Twitch channel. Where can they find you?
It's at twitch.tv/M, my last name, which is GAJEWSKI 35. I saw someone ask about an article. I do one on awesemo.com. If you just hit the college football tab, it is the first one up there and it is free.
All right. And then I'm not going to let Hayden talk because we're going to pump his stuff at the end. So we'll get back to that in a bit. But we are here, of course, as we are every week, to talk the week 5 DFS main slate. So we are excluding the Sunday night game between the Seahawks and Vikings, unfortunately, because it's going to go nuts. And then also my favorite game of the week, because I think Justin Herbert's in a smash spot against the Saints on Monday night. So strictly the main slate here. And how we always start it is with the decision point. We've been building lineups throughout the weeks, and we've all come across a conundrum that we need help bouncing off one another to figure out. So, Matt, you're new to the show. Let's go ahead and hear what you come across this week.
I think one of the main decision points is going to be what we do at running back. We're seeing a couple guys that are chalky. Mike Davis in particular is semi-affordable. David Johnson looks like he's going to carry some ownership as well. So I think one of the main decision points for me is if I'm going to pay up for 2 of these guys or pay down for 2, Mike Davis and maybe a guy like David Johnson. I think right now I'm leaning towards the expensive builds, trying to jam in some more Clyde Edwards-Helaire and players in that price range. Do you guys have a lean on that?
Hayden, do you have a lean on like how you were looking at these running backs right now?
Yeah, I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire maybe more of a tournament play for me. I think that Mike Davis is just the receptions is just so bankable, and I think Ezekiel Elliott's going to be the guy that I want to make sure I have. Like, I want to be overexposed on Ezekiel Elliott.
Same for me, actually. Like, I have tried getting off Edwards-Helaire and Zeke and just mixing and matching that third spot. But like, those are the 2 big ones I want. However, we know that one, we can gain exposure by getting off even, not all of these guys, but even 2 of them if everyone's focused on the same 4 or 5 running backs at the top. And then also we can mix and match one of those spots to a completely lower rostered player. So I don't know. It's a unique position. I guess I would look at who do we believe is the top 3 highest rostered running backs this weekend? Like, I know you both have the ownership projections in front of you, so I'd like to hear that. And then let's go ahead and talk who the fourth option would be as a pivot.
I think the top three are going to be some combination of Mike Davis, Ezekiel Elliott, and then I think it's going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is for sure going to be top 5. It sounds like, Hayden, you might think he'll be a little bit lower than that. Where do you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
He's going to be top 3, I think. I think it's those 3 guys, and then I think it's Kareem Hunt is going to be the 4th guy. I think that he's just in another great spot, especially with the Colts having some injury issues right now. So I think that Kareem Hunt's probably going to be more of a top 4 than like outside of that.
Interesting. Yeah, Kareem Hunt's the one that we would assume gets 20-plus touches as well, since he was actually removed from the practice sport altogether today on Friday after one full participation. So it's looking very good for Kareem Hunt. We'll talk about those guys more as we move along here. Hayden, what conundrum did you run into when building lineups this week?
Yeah, so in the first couple of weeks, I was definitely trying to just punt off tight ends, but I think that with Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, and George Kittle all in pretty good spots, I think that I'm leaning towards paying up for tight end for the first time. Of course, we've seen Travis Kelce light up the Raiders before. George Kittle looked awesome in his return, and Jimmy G is going to be back. Darren Waller could see like upwards of 10 targets in comeback mode against the Chiefs. So are we going to pay up for those guys or completely try to find another $3,500 tight end? I cannot play Logan Thomas again. I just can't do it.
My opinion on that is that, remember, this is the very first slate. We actually have all of those guys, not just in good spots, but they're just available. Before this, we could have reached down for Logan Thomas. Like, I was building lineups and I had Ian Thomas at one point, right? Because Panthers last week ran a season high rate of 12 personnel. Now they get the Falcons, who have been sieves to opposing tight ends. I think if Jordan Akins doesn't play, we can look at Darren Fells, who's more than capable of 2 touchdowns to match the top tight ends. But again, like, these cheapos have to be able to match Kelce, Kittle, and even Mark Andrews. And that's why I think you should pay up this week.
I agree with that too. Do you guys remember in week 1, this is before Robert Tonyan's emergence in 3 touchdown game with the Packers, but Robert Tonyan dropped a 0 and he was second in the Millie Maker and he won some huge tournaments like the Slant. He was just, that roster construction got you to all of the like premier plays. But I agree with you guys. I don't think we see that again.
Hayden, do you want to talk about this spot? Because the chat is already well onto it. Someone who could likely be one of the, if not the highest owned tight end of the weekend, Eric Ebron against the Eagles.
Yeah, we've seen Juju and Deontay on the injury report. They're both going to be playing. Eric Ebron is going to be touchdown dependent. I don't think that the target share is there enough, especially because the Steelers aren't passing as much. I think they're 26 in neutral pass rate. But the Eagles have really struggled. They don't have safeties right now. They don't have linebackers. So that's why Eric Ebron's definitely in play. And he's probably the best 4,000 or less tight end on the slate.
And with that, let's go ahead and move on as we continue to take questions throughout the chat to our highest owned player for tournaments, cash games, whatever the case. This is the player we want to be overweight on. And as we are talking here, I'll also work on spinning it towards our DFS toolkit, dfs.rotoworld.com, and build the lineup with the players we like the most. So, Matt, let's go ahead and get started with your highest rostered player this week.
Yeah, usually I'm more likely to be overweight on the running back position overall just because of the volume being more bankable, at least at the top. I know we have guys like Michael Thomas that sometimes receive this elite target volume as well, but it's more projectable. And a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire really stands out to me on DraftKings, specifically priced at $6,800, really affordable for his role in the offense. He's not someone who's game script dependent. He'll run a ton of routes. Currently 59% of Mahomes dropbacks. If you just look at raw opportunities, targets plus carries, he's averaging over 21 per game. Now we get him in a nice matchup here against the Las Vegas Raiders, favored by nearly 2 scores. I'm going to have a hard time getting away from Edwards-Helaire, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I mean, we've seen the usage go up. They're not using Darrell Williams very much at all anymore, and rightfully so. He's looked really bad. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire hasn't looked elite between the tackles yet, but that was 3 bad matchups in a row. The Raiders are bottom 2 or 3 in all rushing defensive categories. So I think that there's reason to play him in cash. There's reason to play him in tournaments as well.
I just outright like the under in that game as well. I don't think they reached 56. Like, remember in the first 2 games for the Chiefs, Mahomes only went 20 plus yards downfield on 4% of his attempts. It's truly like they scaled the playbook back. They showed up against what was being argued as the best team in the league. They boat raced them, just blew the Ravens out of the water. And then, of course, the Patriots, as they do every single week, presented a great defensive game plan. But then the Chiefs went down the field in the second half, had drives of 85 and 75 yards, and took care of business. I don't see the Raiders holding any fight in this game whatsoever. And that's what makes me lean on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who hit a season-high rate of 95% of Kansas City's backfield touches just last week. Like, this finally looks like the explosion game for him in this spot. Hayden, what about the player you're highest on this week?
Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be in the mix. I think I'm going to go with Kareem Hunt just because I'm not really sold on Dearness Johnson actually being a 1B committee member. He's going to see some carries, but I don't think this is going to be a 2-back committee. I think this is just going to be Kareem Hunt, and I think that with David Njoku back in the lineup, there's going to be a heavy 12 personnel usage again, and Kareem Hunt on the field, he gets targeted a lot. So I think that Jarvis Landry doesn't look fully right. Odell Beckham it's not the greatest matchup for him against a Colts defense that wants to keep everything in front of them. They play a lot of zones. So I think there's going to be a lot of action for Kareem Hunt with some dump offs. And then, of course, he's looking like one of the most explosive runners. So I think that Kareem Hunt with 20 carries, maybe a couple of targets on top of that, I think that he's going to be a smash.
Do you have any spin on the Browns backfield situation after Dearness Johnson led the team in carries, Matt?
I think it was more just the function of Cleveland was up a lot in that game. And I know Dallas kind of pulled back and made it close at the end. But Kareem Hunt was on the injury report last week. There were some questions if he would even play. He ends up gutting it out. And then with a guy who's banged up and you're leading by so many points, you just don't need to play him that much. I love Dearness Johnson, former AAF star, as much as you guys, but I think it's going to be Kareem Hunt as well.
And don't let anyone say otherwise. The AAF was the elite league to the XFL. Just because the XFL was only available on DraftKings and AAF was only available on, what was the website? Fanball, yeah, where the highest stake game was a $200 three-man between Evan Silva and Proctor and myself every week. That's all that was happening, trading each other's money. The AAF was the superior league. But anyways, XFL is still fun. I agree with you guys. I still think it's going to be an 80-20 split, assuming a competitive game, not even a split, in favor of Kareem Hunt. And interesting enough, the Colts have not played anyone despite being the number 5 defensive DVOA, as someone has a plane fly over them right now, and rushing defense. Is that like the Burbank Airport or something? The Colts have played the Vikings, the Jaguars, 2 other opponents, so I can't remember off the top of my head. But either way, yes, now they get the Browns' number 1 ranked offensive line in Football Outsiders' adjusted line yard metric. Like, I just think the Browns exploit them and maul them in the trenches for Kareem Hunt. So I agree with both of you. I don't want to take the flex spot for my highest rostered player. That's the issue here. But I guess I will, because I am highest on Ezekiel Elliott among all the running backs this week. Simply put, I don't think Dak Prescott will throw for 6,700 yards on 800 attempts at the end of the year. It's probably not wise to bet against the regression of this team, but I also think not the softest passing matchup the Cowboys have had to date, but certainly the softest opponent overall. We haven't really had a game where they can put their foot on the gas and just let Zeke go crazy. Like, as Sharp Football's Rich Rebar had tweeted earlier this week, the Cowboys have only led for 7 snaps this entire year, and I think that changes. A lot of people will be on Daniel Jones and the Giants offense, which makes me spin it back with Zeke and the Cowboys defense as my favorite. We'll talk about this a little bit later. I won't say the stack in particular, but I think that's an optimal strategy for tournaments because Zeke gets leverage off of the Cowboys passing game, and having their defense gets leverage off of everyone trying to go cheap with the Giants offense. And yes, a good spot, but it's Daniel Jones. It's the Giants offense under Jason Garrett. Of course they can fail in this matchup. So I love Zeke and the defense.
Yeah, but I think that if anyone that's trying to project what the Cowboys have done the first 4 weeks through the rest of the season is out of their minds. So I think that Zeke Elliott, his rushing totals, I would hit the over on them.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree. I mean, even if they don't say they get a negative game script for whatever reason, Zeke's target volume is absolutely bananas. 12 targets and 8 targets the last 2 weeks. I think he's game script independent here.
Let's talk about this matchup as a whole then, because let's say, although I love Zeke no matter what, has out-touched Tony Pollard 93-12 on the entire year. I'm not worried about Tony Pollard whatsoever. But let's just say we don't play Cowboys defense and we instead run it back with the Giants offense. Let's start with you, Hayden. Like, do you have any favorites in this matchup if you think it's going to shoot out?
I think Evan Ingram's definitely in play if you're not looking to go up to Kelsey or Kittle or Mark Andrews or Darren Waller. I think that Evan Ingram's probably the best mid-priced or mid-range tight end of the week. And then I think Darius Slayton is somebody I wrote up as a rebound candidate. The wide receiver usage is there. He's dominating in targets. And the Giants are just passing the ball a ton. And that's going to continue. They can't run the ball with their offensive line. So I think that Darius Slayton is definitely boom bust. That's just the way he's used in that offense. But this could be a situation where he booms.
Yeah, and as Next Level also points out, like Slayton, he is projecting as one of the highest owned receivers on this slate, which, again, he leads the team in air yards, explosive young guy, but it's clearly not someone I have to have in tournaments, right? Like, it's someone I can easily fade, which leads us to our next question now, we'll start with you, Matt, the one player you are getting off of because you think his ownership, which is high, will not be justified this week.
One guy I'm seeing with pretty high ownership is David Johnson. Hayden, I'm curious where you have him slotted in at. And David Johnson, I think, has a lot of concerns, not just the coaching change too, but Duke Johnson's return. That was more of a timeshare that I was anticipating. I know Houston is favored in this matchup. It's really the best game they've played all year. But with volume concerns in that offense and efficiency concerns for that matter, David Johnson's someone I'm going to try to get away of. Where do you have him in ownership?
Just under 10%. Yeah, and I saw the same thing. You saw David Johnson, his routes run percentage like in the 80s, 90% in the first 3 weeks. And then last week it dropped down to 40% with Duke Johnson involved. I do think that the David Johnson can get there with a high team total with just the rushing volume. But it's definitely a reasonable fade.
I agree. I guess it's a volatile situation, right? Because maybe Duke Johnson's routes run increased from last week, since this is basically a new regime under Tim Kelly, who's finally being allowed to call plays for himself, and Romeo Cornell. And what strikes me is that, like, I keep coming back to week one where David Johnson looked explosive. Like, he looked great in a good matchup. And I understand he looked bad in the other matchups, but also you're not going to run on the Ravens and the Steelers anyhow. So that's why I'm still somewhat affected by David Johnson's ownership. Like, I want the guy to be good, although I will say I'll probably be underweight in tournaments. Hayden, what about the player you're going to be underweight on?
For me, it's Kenyon Drake, who just doesn't look right to me on tape. He's not beating anybody on the outside. And I've heard the quote, Cliff Kingsbury wants to get him involved. But this Jets-Cardinals game just feels really weird to me. I feel like the Cardinals offense just in general is not in full rhythm, despite DeAndre Hopkins balling out. Kyler Murray's running like crazy. But if you take away those two elements, the rest of the offense has not looked fully up to par. And I think that Chase Edmonds is involved enough. And the Jets defense, while it's not good by any means, are better up front than in the secondary. So I think I will be fading Kenyon Drake in tournaments.
What is your spin, Matt, on that entire backfield situation? Are you buying low in the season-long teams you have on Kenyon Drake? Do you think he immediately steps up and you should play him in tournaments this week? Like, what's the deal?
I lost like a small mortgage payment on Kenyon Drake last week. So I'm not really.
Last month for me.
Yeah, man. Oh, geez. And I think Hayden said it best. There's a lot of concerns with this overall Arizona offense. Chase Edmonds for sure looks better, especially as a pass catcher. He's out-targeted Kenyon Drake despite running fewer routes. And then if you just look at the overall upside of the offense, Kyler Murray, he's only averaging 6.4 yards per attempt. They're not moving the ball as well as you would think. Like, DeAndre Hopkins had 41 yards last week on 7 catches.
Interesting. We have quite a few questions here about Brandon Cooks. So I want to cut it to the rest of you. So let's just talk about Brandon Cooks in general, because the routes are there, Hayden. And I know the targets were not there last week, but I do think it's kind of a sneaky spot to come back to him if you would like to pay down from Will Fuller.
Yeah, if you look at Deshaun Watson's stacks, and Brandon Cooks' pricing has dropped a little bit. He's on the field on basically every single route. Unfortunately, he's really low in yards per route run because he's not getting the ball at all. The upside is obviously there as a deep downfield target. Certainly a decent punt play, especially if you have Deshaun Watson or Jaguars stacks. I think that Deshaun Watson, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks is a pretty good millie maker stack lineup.
Do you lean either way, Matt? Fuller, Cooks, or neither?
I'm only really getting to either of these guys in stacks of the game, and I certainly prefer Will Fuller just because of the bankable target volume he receives. You do have to pay for that, though. I do think if you go the cheap stack route, it's a decent game to look at. It's coming in with a lot lower ownership than some of the other high-totaled games, and we're still getting a game approaching 55 total points. Two really bad defenses, too, particularly the Jaguars. I mean, they're allowing 8.3 yards per pass attempt. That's absolutely horrific.
And this is what keeps coming to my mind that Mello Bill mentions. CJ Henderson, possibly back for Jacksonville, hurts Fuller a little bit. It's Jacksonville's defense that I'm looking at because they already put DJ Hayden on IR midweek. And then CJ Henderson and Miles Jack were limited the past two practices, both listed as questionable. Doug Marrone said both are 50-50. And Josh Allen, elite pass rusher who leads the team in pressures this year, didn't practice at all this week, likely isn't going to play. And the Bengals in that second half last week, their drives were touchdown, field goal. And though in the two quarters that, of course, the three players, not including Josh Allen that I mentioned, missed. And so I think it opens up a lot for Deshaun Watson, the offense as a whole, if those guys happen to miss, or if we get word that they may be limited but are going to play anyhow. So I don't have a lot of Deshaun Watson right now, but I could definitely see myself changing that tune in 48 hours if those players are ruled out.
There you go. If you go play on Yahoo, Deshaun Watson would be your quarterback. I can guarantee you. Just
what
the way
is
the pricing set up, he's like significantly lower than like your Lamar Jackson types. And I think that for the second straight week, I will be dabbling in some Deshaun Watson.
All right. Well, I have an unpopular opinion coming in hot. My number one fade in tournaments, unfortunately, is going to be Mike Davis because he is going to be highly rostered. And I think the pivots are there to get off of him. I love James Robinson for starters, who received every single running back touch for the Jaguars last week and is now in a tremendous matchup against the league worst rushing defense. And remember, Gardner Minshew has been in his best whenever DJ Shark has been available. 300 yards and or 3 touchdowns into 3 games with DJ Shark playing for Chris Conley, who put up the worst wide receiver performance on film we have seen all year long. So I love James Robinson as a pivot. I also like Teddy Bridgewater, Robbie Anderson, and DJ Moore as a pivot off of Mike Davis because this passing game could very well go nuclear. Like we talk about DJ Moore potentially bouncing back, and that's fine. That could happen. But Robbie Anderson could still just exist. He could still be there doing what he's doing right now with DJ Moore bouncing back. And if that's the case, I want to get exposure through the air and get off where everyone else is, and that's on the ground with Mike Davis. Plus, you can soak up Mike Davis touchdowns via Teddy Bridgewater as a possibility as well. Matt, what do you think about that Panthers passing attack this week?
I love the Panthers passing attack. Teddy Bridgewater has quietly been really efficient in Carolina. He's averaging 8.1 yards per attempt. That's 10th in the NFL, completing 73% of his passes. It's not really something we've seen from Teddy Bridgewater this year. So I actually like him quite a bit. And I think the stacking options, one, they're pretty cheap. And two, it's condensed. It's mostly DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Both have target shares north of 20%. I think you can go to either of them. You can double stack them. And then, of course, there's going to be run back options if you want to go the full game.
So I have our toolkit again pulled up here. The URL is in the window, and that's because we're going to get into our favorite large entry tournament plays of the week. So whether it be a good pivot, whether it be just someone who is off the radar right now that we like that's not popping anywhere else, go ahead. Let's go ahead and start with you, Matt.
I think one guy you can look at is Marquise Brown. And we haven't really seen Marquise Brown in a competitive game. They've blown out 3 opponents, and then they kind of got blown out themselves by the Chiefs. But Brown has really good market share numbers. He's top 10 in target share and air yard share this year, but we just haven't seen them in a competitive game. For example, Marquise Brown's 26.5% target share. You know, it's above 10% more than a guy like CeeDee Lamb, but CeeDee Lamb has more just raw targets. If we see Baltimore in a competitive game this year, I think Marquise Brown could be a really nice leverage play, projected to come in really low owned.
Do you have any thoughts on the Baltimore offense in general, Hayden? Because as we saw, Lamar Jackson out of practice Wednesday and Thursday, but a full go for Friday, and I expect him to play without any limitations whatsoever as a QB1.
Yeah, that's the thing. I do wonder if people are going to be a little scared off of Lamar Jackson if they think that his knee injury is a problem. I don't think it is. He stayed in the game for a couple plays after he was injured. So I think Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown makes a ton of sense, especially with Mark Andrews. If you're going to go pay up a tight end, I think that's the only time I'll be using Mark Andrews is in Lamar Jackson stacks. So I think that the Ravens offense could go crazy.
All right, we still have half our salary left. So Morton or Froome, Hayden, where would you like to pay up or down for a large entry tournament play?
So I'm going to go with Sammy Watkins, who is the top rebound candidate for me in my column. He has led the Chiefs in targets in 3 of 4 games. The 4th game that he didn't, he left early in. The volume's there. They're kind of using him underneath, which is nice, and that's kind of elevating his floor. And we know he has a huge ceiling in this offense, and he is really cheap. And I think that he is a great pivot off Tyreek Hill. He's a great pivot off Travis Kelce. Even possibly with Clyde Edwards-Helaire if you're going to go with a Patrick Mahomes stack. I think that Sammy Watkins' upside is through the roof.
Sammy Watkins. My only issue, I know Sammy Watkins was injured one of these games. My only issue is that Mecole Hardman has outscored Sammy Watkins the past 3 games on 73 fewer snaps. That also has to do with touchdown, of course, which Sammy Watkins is getting. And Mecole Hardman fortunately ran more routes than Demarcus Robinson last week. So it still seems like Mecole Hardman exists as an explosive player on limited usage.
They're basically priced at the same, and I would want to be betting on Sammy Watkins, who hasn't scored the touchdowns that Mecole Hardman has, but we know that touchdown scoring is random. I know Mecole Hardman, we can project for more or a higher touchdown rate than other players just because of the way he's used and he's so explosive. But I do think Sammy Watkins, when you watch him on tape, he looks so explosive. Like he was catching balls in the middle of the field and bursting upfield. So I think that a huge game could be in store. And you're really pivoting off of Tyreek Hill, who's like $3,000 more too.
I'm not going to plug mine in. I'll hit the optimizer in a second. But my favorite large entry tournament play, I'm still okay. So one, I got to start off with, I'm still struggling with whether this guy can match the top of the slate. So can this guy at a cheap cost match Dak Prescott? If Dak Prescott goes off, probably not. Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, these other higher owned quarterbacks. And that's because I like Jimmy Garoppolo a lot this week. I was looking at Beathard if he started, but Jimmy Garoppolo not on Friday's injury report. He's fully healthy. He's going to play. This is going to be his first game with not only George Kittle available for a full contest since Kittle left in the second quarter week 1, but he'll also have Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, who had an illness on Thursday, but looked like he's going to be cleared for the game tomorrow. And it also looks like Raheem Mostert will be back as well. So this is a full-on 49ers attack that is getting a Dolphins defense that is poor, 1, and also has allowed the 4th most of fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And it's just a spot I want to be on because the Niners have 4 of their top 5 cornerbacks out for this one, already ruled out, including Richard Sherman, who's on IR. And I like bringing it back potentially with Devontae Parker because this is a weak week, in my opinion, for receivers. Like we're all struggling to find the 2nd or 3rd receiver we like the most. And so I do kind of like Garoppolo paying up for Kittle and then having Parker on the bring back.
I think this makes a lot of sense. Have you seen this total has just absolutely soared throughout?
I didn't know that.
Oh, dude, it opened at 47.5 and it's up to 51.5. This total is just shot through the roof. If you got the over at the beginning of the week, props to you. So I think that just speaks to the possible stacking potential of this game as well. It's a good call.
Daigle, I'm paying attention to Raheem Mostert. We don't know. It sounds like he's going to be a game time decision, and this game does start in the second slate of games. So there could be an opportunity where if you're willing to roll the dice and Raheem Mostert doesn't play, Jerick McKinnon's going to be super low owned if you want to throw him in the stack as well. We've seen him basically dominate the backfield last week. I think Jeff Wilson only played 6 snaps. I think that a McKinnon, Garoppolo, Kittle stack could be really, really low owned, especially if McKinnon has 0 ownership. He would be a great play if we knew Raheem Mostert was out, but it sounds like he's going to be more of a game time decision.
My eyes are getting big because like the light is hitting as we're talking here. No, this is great because remember, this game is a 305, so it's a flex game. So let's say you take out Kareem Hunt if he carries more ownership than Zeke, and then we put in Zeke, and then we put in McKinnon in the flex if Mostert's ruled out. And if not, you can always change this in the afternoon. But then you could actually screw you guys. We are putting Garoppolo in here. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Garoppolo, McKinnon, and then Parker. And then how much do we have left after that? And then so we have a tight end. Okay.
You can get rid of my
12K.
Sammy Watkins call to optimize this.
Okay, let's do this then. So this is what I love for DFS though, for anyone tuning in. Like these afternoon games, I try to prioritize the flex spot to my advantage. Of course, it changed a little bit, but for this week we have these 3 games. This one in particular, who will likely be one of the highest owned games, including everyone in the slate. So yeah, we have an afternoon flex here, 2 of them. Let's go ahead and optimize this. Let's see what happens. I'm either going to yell or okay. So they did plug in Darius Slayton. Who else did it plug in?
You can do a quick
Travis
pivot
Kelce.
do a quick pivot to Kittle.
Cool. And then let's see how much is left after that. Kittle, our second highest projected tight end behind Travis Kelce. No shock. And there's 800 left. Okay. Well, I mean, I can just do that. And then what do we have left? 6,600. So, I mean, you could go anywhere on here. They have Will Fuller, DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, Robbie Anderson. I'd probably just pay for DJ Moore. Okay. I really don't mind that at all then. That's super interesting. I didn't see that total just yet. So yeah, I want to talk about this guy because he's going to be looked at this week. And although Friendly Guys has been somewhat mean in the chat, I'm kind to everyone, and we get to everyone in this show because I love all. And he asked, are we off Mixon this week? So Matt, what are your thoughts on Joe Mixon after his blow-up game in week 4?
Mixon, he had 3 terrible games before it, but we get him in a tough matchup here. The thing with Mixon is his volume is so good. I don't think you can ever really fade players seeing this volume. We know that projecting game script can get you into trouble in some games. We saw this with Baltimore when they played Kansas City. So Mixon is certainly in my player pool. I am not going to be as heavy on him as some other running backs like Kareem Hunt and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Just a few more concerns for him. It was positive he received 6 targets. He appears to be running more routes. So I do like that for sure. 6,300. He could be another one of these pivots you were talking about off a guy like Mike Davis.
And what about you, Hayden, with that situation?
Yeah, Giovanni Bernard had season lows in routes and snaps overall, and that was kind of because Joe Mixon was just taking over that role, and that's something that we've been hoping for like the last year and a half. So I'm kind of hesitant to fully go in and bank on that role moving forward, but if it happens again this week where he's playing on negative game script, that's the difference between Joe Mixon being like on the RB1-2 border and being like a top 8 fantasy running back.
Does anyone have thoughts on this situation as a pivot, as just a fade? Because FDMNFL asked, what about Josh Jacobs, Matt?
Josh Jacobs isn't my favorite player to target. Kind of conversely to Joe Mixon, we've seen his routes decrease. He only ran a route on 42% of Carr's dropbacks last week. Jalen Richard isn't playing a huge role, but it's something. And when we get Josh Jacobs in negative game script, which we project to do here against Kansas City, I think the opportunities could be decreased compared to what we've seen in the beginning of the year. So, he's in the same price range as a guy like Mixon. There's just a lot of options there. So I think the opportunity cost is enough for me to fade him.
He's not going to project as well, but we have seen the Chiefs dare teams to run the ball against them. And Josh Jacobs had, I think, 99 yards and like 106 yards against the Chiefs last year. The difference here is he's playing a little bit more on third downs, like you said. It's not like as much as the other elite running backs, but it's more than last year. And then I think there's a chance that he could get the 100-yard rushing bonus, even in bad game script, just because the Chiefs are begging teams to run the ball against them. It really helps their offense. So I think that he's in play. He's just not going to project as well as the other guys in that $6,000 range. He's probably going to be projected for 4 or 5 less points than some of the other guys.
And Next Level does have a good point here. Jacob is 6,300 on DK and 8,200 on FanDuel. So there's clearly a big discrepancy there. So yes, a big price difference. My only thing also for Josh Jacobs is that, again, I like the under in this game. I like the Chiefs just to take care of business and go home because they know they have an AFC Championship preview on Thursday against the Bills. I don't expect them to open their playbook at all. So that's why I don't like Josh Jacobs. And I know people don't like to hear this, but it's just been what we projected for Josh Jacobs, a smash spot against Carolina in week 1. And in that time, since the Raiders do have the league's toughest projected schedule that we talked about all offseason in weeks 2 through 8, then it's been in that time. He's been the RB24, the RB36, and then last week was an RB34 as well. So it's nothing that you should be shocked about. Like, I know we all want him to be involved in the passing game more. It's clearly something that's not going to happen, though. What about this as a potential pivot? because he looked terrific last week, having the playbook opened up for him for a season high 17 touches is Antonio Gibson. So do we have a lean? Do we want to play Antonio Gibson this week? Would he be a good pivot at all, Matt? Is he on your radar whatsoever?
Yeah, he's in a price range kind of by himself too, especially on DraftKings. He's 5K flat. If you're getting down to him, you're probably already looking at a unique roster construction. There are concerns. This game is a low total. The Rams are heavy favorites over Washington, but we have been seeing Gibson's opportunities rise, ran around on 59% of what was Haskins' dropbacks. 29% so far this year, but 13.5 opportunities per game. That's still growing for him. After handling 13 carries and 5 targets, I think you can look to him in some contrarian builds. He's not my favorite, but again, he'll lead you to a contrarian roster construction overall.
I will say that I wouldn't do it. I don't know how many lineups you're playing, Mello. But like in a single entry, if you're only playing one lineup, I don't know if I'd do it. But I think it is interesting to go Washington defense, assuming Chase Young plays, who's questionable, and got in a limited session today, and Antonio Gibson. And because this is the third consecutive game traveling to the East Coast for the Rams, who looked poor last week. And like if they get Chase Young back, remember, Jared Goff's weakness is being under pressure. Still this year, 3.9 yards per attempt when he's been under pressure because they just prioritize dump offs, and hopefully their receivers can just move the ball forward. So I don't think it's bad actually to go Washington defense Antonio Gibson if Chase Young plays, because it just spelled to be a sneaky letdown spot for the Rams this week. Did we have?
I think that's gonna be like the sloppiest game of the week.
That makes sense. The next topic that we close here with is our favorite stacks of the week. And we can start here because as I am looking for the question, there we go. Are we off the entire Eagles team this week? And I don't want to speak for everyone, but I'm going to say yes, hell yes. I don't want anything to do with the Eagles this week. I worry about the Steelers as well, if only because I just think they roll the Eagles. I mean, last week without Jason Peters, Carson Wentz was under pressure on 47% of his dropbacks, nearly a coin flip whether Carson Wentz was under pressure or not, which was the third highest rate of the entire week and a season high mark. Peters, of course, got moved to IR. We don't know about Lane Johnson's status for this game. And for the team that blitzes at the league's highest rate in Pittsburgh, it just seems like a horrendous matchup for the Eagles passing game. So I actually, although I love Deontay Johnson, I think James Conner is the best tournament play in this game.
Big agree with that. I don't think there's any Eagles. I think there was like some excuse to get to Zach Ertz last week, and if you're playing the full slate, but I don't think that there's any reason to try that right here, just because we have all the other tight ends. We don't know what Deshaun Jackson's role is if he's gonna be back, and I just think that it's best just to fade it completely.
I agree with that. It's a huge mismatch between the D-line and the offensive line here. I'm not sure how much time Carson Wentz is going to have to throw the ball.
And Matt, what about you? Is there a stack that is not Eagles-Pittsburgh that you are excited about this week?
I'm interested in some Cincinnati stacks going against Baltimore. It's a defense we've seen allow 300 yards in back-to-back games. One of those was to Dwayne Haskins. So I think we can look to Joe Burrow as a cheaper, low-owned play. He has stacking options across price points. If you want to pay up a little bit, there's a guy like Tyler Boyd who's seen his targets rise. There's guys like T. Higgins, who I think is working his way into that wide receiver 2 role, quietly emerging, playing more snaps, running more routes, 9 and 7 targets in back-to-back games. That game should play with a decent pace as well. So I'm very interested in Burrow. Maybe you could even look to the Baltimore side and just run back some Bengals guys. What do you guys think about that?
What's funny is that, like, I have some builds out there where I started with Lamar and Mark Andrews and then brought it back with Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins. Clearly never AJ Green. Hashtag never AJ Green. And Joe Holka, who is the co-CEO of the Line Movement sports betting company, actually tweeted this earlier that Mark Andrews' target share in man coverage, which is what the Bengals primarily run, is nearly 10 percentage points higher, I think 8 to be exact, than Marquise Brown's. And we know Andrews can be a tight end 1. We know if we're trying to match George Kittle point for point, it will be Andrews most likely to rival that. So I like Lamar and Andrews, or as Hayden said, Marquise Brown, and then Tyler Boyd or Higgins on the comeback. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
I'm on team Mark Andrews over Marquise Brown just because you're at least filling that tight end spot, which is a disaster. So I know we're also looking for wide receivers, but I think that they project similarly. And if one of them hits, you get more value if it's Mark Andrews, because at least you're lapping the field with those tight end points.
And what about you, Hayden? Where is the sneaky stack you were going? I'm glad you did mention that, though, Matt, because, again, so I haven't bet the Ravens because I think Joe Burrow is a sneaky backdoor cover every single week. The dude is he just plays with his hair on fire. He keeps them live, even though I don't think they're a good team. He himself keeps them live weekly. And if he's going to do that and have them hang around, we know they aren't scared to just rear back and throw the ball 47 times a game. But Hayden, what about you?
We kind of hit on all the ones I was going to talk about. I do think my favorite will be Patrick Mahomes with Sammy Watkins and all of those, and then kind of sprinkle in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, sprinkle in Tyreek Hill, sprinkle in Travis Kelce especially. I think that my favorite grouping out of those three would be Patrick Mahomes, Sammy Watkins, and Travis Kelce. Get the tight end spot filled. We've talked about the pivots off of Clyde Edwards-Helaire at similar points per dollar at the running back position. So I think that there is a viable option to fading Clyde Edwards-Helaire in a Patrick Mahomes stack. Go find one of the other 6,500 running backs, and then you fill in the cheap wide receiver with Sammy Watkins.
So I personally will not have Chiefs players outside of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but that is why they are good tournament play, because I believe this will probably be the lowest rostered Mahomes, and just a Chiefs stack in general will be all year, because I think everyone's more in line thinking with myself in that this game, they may not need to put the foot on the gas. And so if you can get Mahomes, Kelce, and Hill above the field, no one would also disagree with that as well. It's still the three of the most explosive players in the entire league. So I think it's a good contrarian stack.
What's nice about it, too, is it's not expensive. We're starting to see the Dallas guys way, way up there in price. You can still stack a guy like Sammy Watkins with Patrick Mahomes, who himself is expensive, but Sammy Watkins is so cheap that still affords you a lot of room to actually play around and get an elite tight end, get some really nice backs, too. So I love the call on the Sammy Watkins stack, Hayden. It's a nice one.
And Friendly Guys asks, is the Raiders defense really that bad? Yes.
Yes.
Next question. Yes.
I will say this offseason, or the last two off seasons, the Raiders have brought in some coverage linebackers. They also brought in a safety. I think they were trying to stop Travis Kelce, but still good luck with that. And even if they do, that's why I'm pivoting off to Sammy Watkins.
And of course, you can run it back with, I think Darren Waller would be my choice, especially with Henry Ruggs practicing on Friday in full. So that eliminates Hunter Renfrow, in my opinion, from seeing 8 to 10 targets. But hey, maybe if you're going the Millie Maker, like the weekly lottery ticket, maybe you do throw out Henry Ruggs, because one play, if used properly in a negative game script, could get you there on a bring back for the Chiefs stack. So I don't hate that either. Let's start with this before I talk about my stack. Has Kyle Allen, because it's comical, but it is worth mentioning because he is 4,100 on DraftKings. So I know a lot of people, rather than going Daniel Jones in cash games, will rather save the money and go all the way down to Kyle Allen. Is this a game for cash games or tournaments that you have been looking at him at all, Matt, if only for the price?
Yeah, we saw this exact situation last year in Kyle Allen's first game. He was priced at the minimum, and he was a really strong cash play. He ended up getting you there, not just because he had a decent game, because of who he afforded you to get in your other positions. So at 4,100, he's nearly half the price of a guy like Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, and he's not bad enough to the point where we shouldn't consider him. If we just look at what Kyle Allen did last year, he averaged about 250 pass yards per game. So he's at least serviceable, and who he allows you to get is worth talking about. At least he's not my favorite play. He's just horrific with turnovers, but it's at least worth mentioning.
I will be playing him 0. I just don't. I think that the one dangerous thing, if looking at last year's stats with Kyle Allen, is the receivers are just not nearly as good with Washington right now. And you're also getting Jalen Ramsey on Scary Terry this week. So that could eliminate some of the upside that you're getting even at the price point. And you're still losing the quarterback spot. I think that this year's quarterback scoring is a little bit different than last year's, just because the top guys are really elite and we're getting more rushing production from quarterbacks. So I think that wasting a quarterback spot, I know we want to pay down occasionally, but to this extent, I'm not sure.
As Hegon points out, there's also tape on Kyle Allen. So you always got to be careful whenever you've seen Kyle Allen play, and then you roster him because everyone already knows how he plays.
Oh, he's the worst, man. He's the worst.
We all say like upgrade over Dwayne Haskins, but I mean it's Kyle Allen. It's whatever. Like we know where the ball goes. And mine is, I already talked about it in depth, so it ruined the surprise. But I do like the 49er stack and bringing it back with Devontae Parker, and I wouldn't bring it back with anyone else because Gesicki, you eliminate getting George Kittle in on that stack. Preston Williams, although I like him as the player, is clearly not getting the target share this year. And Devontae Parker practiced in full for the first time all year and was off the injury report on Friday in a smash spot. Again, because we mentioned 49ers missing 4 of their top 5 corners. So that is my favorite stack. Matt, is there anything? Go ahead, Hayden.
About this game, the other guy, and this is probably the worst take of the stream, Myles Gaskin has like top 12, top 15 fantasy usage. He's been playing on most downs, and he's the best pass. He's being the most involved on passing downs. They're going to be trailing a lot here. He's really cheap at 4,800. I'm guessing his ownership's going to be close to 0 just because it's the 49ers defense on the road. But I think in a bring back scenario, you can see Myles Gaskin catch 5, 6, 7 passes if the game gets out of hand. He's just catching dump off after dump off. And I think that he looks pretty good on tape, and the numbers back that up. His broken tackle rate is like top 3 in the league too.
And of course, you can find all of that in Hayden Winks' fantasy blueprint, or is in the fantasy usage model. It's one of those two. Tuesday.
It's in both of them.
Both of them. Tuesday or Friday. Matt, is there anything else before we get out of here that you would like to put a cap on the slate? Anything we didn't mention that stands out to you as you've been building lineups this week?
Yeah, there's one certain receiver that we talked about a little bit, at least hinted at the beginning of the show. Plays for the Atlanta Falcons, and he's the minimum price. And I think he's a little bit interesting if Julio Jones sits out this game. Hayden, I know you're very familiar with this guy. What's your take? It's Olamide Zaccheaus.
Yes. So there's about 5 different ways you can pronounce his name, but he's been balling at school for a while now. He's really tiny, but he was super productive and yards after the catch machine. And we've seen it when Julio Jones exited. They just kept peppering him with targets. And I think that him and Russell Gage kind of in a similar role where they're not like the craziest athletes, but they can get the job done just off of play volume, because we know that the Falcons every single week are going to be top 5 projected in pass attempts. So I think at $3,000, he's much better as a talent than the other $3,000 players. And I think that with volume on his side this week, that he's actually a good punt play rather than just like punting it off completely.
His 9 targets were a team high last week, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I was pulling it up just to confirm, but I believe so as well. My only issue is, of course, you wouldn't need to worry about Matt Ryan or the Falcons offense as a whole piece if you're only going one player. But that would have been my issue, is that Matt Ryan has been the QB 23 and QB 27 the past 2 weeks without Julio Jones, just like not the same person at all with a disastrous floor. Then again, for the price you mentioned, minimum, Zaccheaus hit that last week with 8 catches for 89 yards, I believe. So that's more than enough to get by at a minimum price, especially if you're playing Mike Davis and run it back. Or like we mentioned, I do also like Teddy Bridgewater, DJ Moore, and Robbie Anderson, however you want to mix it up. I agree. I think we've played Damiere Byrd last week, for instance, was going to be a core cash play if he was on the main slate. He instead got moved to Monday night. KJ Hamler the week prior, men who played a majority of snaps, everyone rostered him to cash because he was the min price. It just seems like another player who's going to play snaps, and we just keep on rostering him to get all of these higher prioritized running backs getting touches.
And for tight ends this week, especially. Like the last weeks you didn't have to play those guys if you weren't playing an elite tight end. But I think that I want to be playing Kelsey and Kittle and Mark Andrews and those guys. So I think that Olamide Zaccheaus, or however you want to pronounce it, is going to be in play for me.
And Hayden, you don't have to have an answer, no pressure. But is there anything else we did not discuss, whether it be a player, a game script, something to watch for that you are looking at for this Week 5 DFS slate?
Yeah, I just think we got to recap it again. I think Jerick McKinnon, if Raheem Mostert is questionable going into the day, I think there's probably going to be an Adam Schefter midnight tweet about Raheem Mostert's status, so pay attention to that. But if McKinnon goes really low owned because Raheem Mostert's a game time call, I think that his ownership should be really low, and that's a great pivot. I think that he projects as a good points per dollar play already, And with the game stack with Garoppolo, I think that he would be an awesome pivot.
As Legalize points out, good thoughts in the chat too, who have complimented my beard oddly enough throughout the show. I don't understand why, but nonetheless, we appreciate it. So with that, Hayden, tell the people where they can find your stuff for this week.
Yep, I'm at Hayden Winks on Twitter. All my columns are there. It's the Fantasy Blueprint and the Fantasy Usage Model, which comes out on late Monday night, and that recaps the previous games using a model, expected points model, basically. The great Matt Gajeski, tell them where they can go for the DFS show, the Twitches, the streams, your Awesemo stuff. Like, where can they find it all?
Everywhere, apparently. I'm on Twitter at Matt_Gajeski. That's the best place to find it all. If you search my name on YouTube, you'll get all the college football stuff. It's all free.
And as A. Germain points out, sick audience viewership. That is correct. We have gone downhill since you have joined the show. So with that, he is Hayden Winks. He is Matt Gajeski. I am John Daigle. Thank you to everyone for joining. We'll see you next week.